What's up, everyone? Welcome into the All 22 NFL show, the official channel of the All 22 fantasy football platform. The only fantasy football game with full 53-man rosters, including offensive linemen, where you get to choose personnel packages and have access to PFF grading and advanced stats to make decisions each week. To learn more and sign up, go to all-22.com. Ray, I'll be honest with you, man. First week of the NFL was fantastic, right? Like, it was absolutely fantastic. So much good football was played, right? We got the amazing Bills-Ravens game. We had the Packers game. For me, was amazing, obviously. Just a lot of really good battles. It was also great because we saw some really cool rookie performances, which I'm hoping we could talk a little bit about today. But just being real with you, man, like, everything that's going on in the world right now, like, the last couple days have been a little tough. And it's made it hard to want to concentrate on this. Just being transparent, right? With, whether or not you're a Charlie Kirk person, whether or not you support his views, whatever, like seeing that kind of stuff on the internet when you go to Twitter to go post something for All 22, like, makes it hard to do it. And it's not even just that, right? Like, a school shooting yesterday, like, just wild stuff happening in the world that makes it like really hard to just be like, hey, I'm super pumped because it's Thursday night and I get to watch Packers tonight, right? I don't know. I don't know if you're feeling that way, but dude, it was a little hard for me to get myself gamed up for today.
Yeah, especially if you have children in this world and you try to protect them from all that can happen. And that's where your mind goes. Sports is the ultimate escape, and which is why I think we all love what we do and consume what we love, because it does bring everybody together, regardless of where you stand on so many other things. That's the great thing about sports, about the game of football, and about the just sheer competitiveness of fantasy sports and gaming in any platform or any sort of format that you find to your liking. So we all need that bit of escape, and I'm happy to partake in any sort of escapism. Is that a word, Chris? Look it up.
Yeah.
You like to look up things while I'm talking. For anyone, that's a it's something that we all need from time to time, and we hope that those times don't keep getting more and more frequent. But it is the great escape, so to speak, and something that brings us all together. So we hope we can do that just a little bit for everybody here and talk about the great game of football. So, with that, I don't know where you want to start, because there was some good stuff in week one. Obviously, we're recording
just before we go
Thursday.
off, right? Just before we go off, I just want to just kind of one more thing, right? I just want to remind people, the majority of the people in this world are good people. The majority of the people in our country are good people. Whether you're on the far left or the far right or somewhere in between, there's a lot of good people in this world and in this country. And as somebody that has driven across the country a few times, right, and done it with you, Ray, right, driving back and forth to Ohio a few times, like, we live in the most beautiful country in the world as well. Like, people need to remember that too, that as much as people want to divide us, like, we are the strongest and best when we're together. So let's keep doing that, right? But now we're going to talk about football. And I am going to get revved up, and I am going to get excited. And I wanted to, Ray, you and I, we don't count our victories very often, and we certainly don't do it after 1 week, right?
I'll do that in the preseason. I don't
care. But Will Johnson, 90.2 defensive grade with 2 pass breakups, number 1 graded defensive player, rookie. Carson Swessinger, 90 defensive grade, 1 hit, 6 tackles, and 2 stops, 2nd highest graded rookie defensive player. Shamar Stewart, 88.9 defensive grade, 3 hurries, 3rd highest graded defensive player. Jahad Campbell, 88.3 defensive grade, 1 stop, 1 forced fumble, 1 pass breakup, 4th highest graded defensive player. And if you're sitting there going, those are highly drafted people, it's people everybody liked. Xavier Watts, 10th highest graded defensive player this week with a 72.8 with 1 stop and 2 pass breakups. Looked like an absolute stud. I'm sitting here today saying, people, tell me where there's a better defensive scout out there, and I'm going to show you a liar. All right. I think I might got defensive. I think I might have my defensive scouting down pretty well right now. And I'm saying that after a week. These guys are all going to be studs. And after week 2, after week 16, after week 17, it's going to be the same way. Those guys.
I heard you loved Chris Paul Jr., the linebacker, actually. So I
did
don't know
not
about all
like Chris
that.
Paul. I didn't. I liked him more than a lot of the other bums that we had at linebacker this year.
Sure. Donovan Jackson, 8th highest graded guard in week 1 for a start for
overall,
the Vikings.
Not just rookie.
Yeah, overall. 8th highest. Did I say rookie? Yeah, 8th highest overall guard for the Vikings week 1. So, yeah.
74.3.
By all means.
Offensive grade, 0 sacks allowed, 0 hurries allowed, 0 hits allowed. Right? Like that's a rookie starting in week 1, right? And we said that. He was our favorite, right? To be drafted first at the guard position. Armand Membu, 89.0 grade, 0 sacks, 0 hurries, 0 hits again. And especially going against Pittsburgh, like insane. And then, Tyler Warren, 89.0. Like, I don't know if you remember this conversation, but pretty sure I said he was the best tight end of the All-22 era in terms of who I've scouted. I stand by that after a week. I think he's the most complete tight end we have in the NFL from a prospect perspective stepping in. Dude, I think we hit a bunch of home runs this year. I'm sure there's people going to hit the comments and go, what about this guy that you talked about and you loved?
I wouldn't know who they could possibly use for that. So yeah, go in the comments and show me and link the clip or something if you got something to bring to the table, because I would love to hear that. But also, speaking of rookies, I think we are treated to a really good matchup this week. And I know I'm jumping ahead here, but you have Ted McMillan versus Will Johnson, 2 big physical skill players on the outside there. Ted caught 2 of 3 contested catches or contested targets in week 1. Then you have Will Johnson with 2 pass breakups. And again, big physical. He had a great week as well. So yeah, that's a heck of a matchup to watch. So you're talking Panthers Cardinals for the neutral viewer without a rooting interest in either of those teams. Obviously you should tune in if you have either of those guys on your All-22 team, but also just to watch, like you said, good, exciting, intriguing football for a young matchup like that. I'm all about that.
For sure. I think it's going to be a fun debate as the season goes on with Egbuka and McMillan, kind of people discussing who should have been the first receiver taken. And, again, I was a Ted McMillan fan. I liked Egbuka as well, but I didn't think he was at the same level of prospect Ted is. And I mean, I'll be honest. And again, people might very much disagree with this, but when I watched those 2 games, Egbuka made some amazing plays, right? And won some really important routes for that team and in that game. But I still think the body of work that Ted McMillan put together during his performance was different. And it was at a level that I wasn't even sure that he could exceed. And like, he looked so good and he looked like such a pro. I was really excited about him. I think what Egbuka did was really special as well, but it was more of like stuff that I thought he would do. And like, yes, he made 2 massive catches in a big game. I don't know if that happens every week, right? Like, but what Tet did will happen every week based on what I saw. So that's just kind of my 2 cents on that.
Mm-hmm. I'm just going to rebut any argument against me, as it's been 1 week, and obviously week 1, here's why I was correct. So yeah, it's the best time of year. I can validate anything that supports my argument and dismiss it as being too early if it doesn't. It's the greatest.
All right. Well, I know you wanted to do some kind of like week 2 matchups, right? Projecting forward week 2. Game tonight is obviously Packers Commanders, huge game. It's funny. I was in the car with Bobby. He drove me home from work a couple days ago, and we were talking about this. We were actually talking about last week's game, and he's saying, boy, you must be super excited about the Packers. And while I am, right, we beat up on a Lions team that lost both its offensive and defensive coordinator, right? Like I'm still excited about it because I think that's a very talented team. But my response to him, not even knowing that the Packers played Thursday against Washington, I was like, yeah, but if we had played a team like Washington and did that, I'd feel a lot better about this. But doing it against the Lions after they lost those coaches, like I didn't feel great. We kind of get to see that tonight, right? We get to see if the Packers are really this team that's going to be dominant throughout the season tonight against the Commanders. Because to be honest, I don't even know if we win this game, right? It's going to be tough. If we play like we did against the Lions, good chance we win. But that was, we had all engines revving on that one.
Yeah, you certainly did. And I think it's interesting because when I look at the matchup overall, I kind of go, I like Green Bay more than I thought I even would, in the sense of when you look at some of the premium positions for each roster and how they match up. Zach Tom and Rasheed Walker, not that Rasheed Walker's like at the top of the heap of all offensive tackles or anything, but coming off of a quality game in week 1, against Von Miller, Jacob Martin, Dorrance Armstrong on the edge there for the Commanders defense on the outside. I like that matchup for the Packers on the offensive line there. And then when you flip that around, I imagine first off that the Commanders will give heavy help to someone like Josh Connerly Jr. at right tackle, given Micah Parsons lurking. But he's going to move around a lot, and such that I really wouldn't, if I'm talking all 22, start any of the interior linemen from Washington for my roster. And I just think Jaden Daniels, I mean, he's seen Micah before, so it's not as if you kind of have this thing with Micah Parsons, and you kind of saw it a little bit with Jared Goff in week 1 on the Parsons sack, where quarterbacks don't realize that his closing pursuit is different from pretty much anyone else. Whether you want to argue that Myles Garrett is the best, edge in the league right now, or TJ Watt should be up there, you could have that argument, and that's fine. But when it comes to pure just closing speed from a pass rusher, Micah Parsons is by far the best in the league at that. And you kind of saw that with Jared Goff as he kept rolling out, and he could have thrown the ball away, but just doesn't quite realize that it's different when Mike is chasing you versus anybody else. It happened to Mahomes. It happens to every quarterback. And I think someone like Jaden Daniels, given that you're still just getting into the flow of the season, might see that a bit too. He might try to be typical Jaden Daniels in making a play happen, and Micah Parsons may make him pay for it. So I'm looking at that matchup in particular on both lines and think it favors the Packers quite a bit here. So I'm excited from a Packers standpoint, and I think you're being a little bit too pessimistic about your boys, but maybe someone is clipping this in a few days and commenting on next week's episode about this and what I said about that. But I do like the matchups overall for Green Bay on Thursday night. We're recording this about 4 hours before kickoff here. So depending on when you watch this, you'll either be watching with hindsight or agreeing with me before the game actually kicks off. But that's how I see it overall. And then also Devontae Wyatt. I don't know if you wanted to talk about him, but could he have a second strong game in a row against this interior? And what does that do for your defense? Is the presence of Micah Parsons aiding him? I don't know, but that's someone who's kind of forgotten that, hey, maybe he's having a bit of a renaissance year.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because he was a guy that in that draft class I really liked, right? And I was very excited when the Packers drafted him. We haven't seen it, right? We hadn't seen it at all. And it's funny because it's like the first game that he plays next to Michael Parsons, all of a sudden he looks like the superstar that I thought he could be, right? And so did Lucas Van Ness for all intents and purposes. Like Lucas Van Ness had the best game of his career by a country mile. So it just shows again what a presence like Micah Parsons does to an entire defensive unit. One thing to keep in mind, it's TBD right now, but there is a chance that both Zach Tom and Aaron Banks do not play in this game. So basically the entire left side of the Packers offensive line could be out. Luckily for them, right? I wouldn't say the strength of Washington is their pass rush. So it's while it's obviously bad and you want your starters in there, I don't think that's the worst thing in the world, especially when the Packers had some really good performances preseason by other offensive linemen, backup offensive linemen that could step in and really step up for them. But that's something to definitely keep an eye on. But okay, we spent a lot of time on Packers.
One more thing you just jogged my memory on too.
Mm-hmm.
The last time LaFleur and Dan Quinn faced off against each other did not go well for Dan Quinn at all. It was pretty embarrassing for Dan Quinn and that Cowboys defense in the playoffs.
Yeah.
So another thing to keep in mind as well. So just throwing that out there.
Yeah, and I think that could go either way, right? It's either Dan Quinn's been studying this since that time, right? And how he could have been better, right? Or Matt LaFleur gets the best of him again. But going on to the next game, which is the Dolphins Patriots, and honestly, that one to me, that's a battle of two teams that looked very out of their league in week 1. Dolphins, probably the worst performance I've seen of them since kind of Tua's rookie year when that offensive line was as bad as it gets. But this Dolphins team really does look pretty pitiful. I think it could be a good game where if you have questions at quarterback and you don't know who to start and you do have Drake May in your depth chart, could be an interesting time to give him an opportunity, right, against this Dolphins defensive back group that definitely struggled and will continue to struggle this year. I think that's definitely a matchup to look at, along with some of the receivers on the Patriots team. If there's somebody that you want to give an opportunity, this is a good group of defensive backs to give it a try against. Ray, who did you have in this one?
So not necessarily predictive of performance, but I want to see Patrick Paul versus Keon White. And does Patrick Paul follow up his really good game in week one? Probably the only bright spot for the Dolphins in week one. Does he sustain that against a quality rusher like White against the Patriots in a divisional matchup? That's probably the matchup I'll be watching closest in this game. Everywhere else I look, it's kind of a lot of bad versus bad. Honestly, I still think the Patriots are a year away at least, but that's one that's intriguing as well, because if Paul does sustain that type of performance, obviously it's huge for the Dolphins and what it means for them at a premium spot at left tackle. But that will just signify a massive improvement from where he was coming into the league and his performance a year ago. There was commentary out of training camp in Miami that Patrick Paul was looking really good and obviously much better than he did last year. So if this sustains and that holds to be true, that is, you'll take the wins as you can get them, even if they're not on the scoreboard for Miami right now. And so outside of that, I do think they can provide some pressure with Chop Robinson and maybe Bradley Chubb against a really young Will Campbell. And then you have Morgan Moses as well. It's not necessarily the Eagles tandem at offensive tackle. So that's something I'll be watching as well. Maybe that can sort of disrupt the Patriots operation on offense overall. But by and large, like you said, not a lot of bright spots there for them. I do think overall it's a pretty good spot for Drake May if you need to platoon some quarterbacks. But I'll be watching Patrick Paul in that battle on the left side there of that offensive line.
All right. Next game we have is the Bears and Lions. This is another great interdivision matchup. And one thing I just kind of wanted to call out, one of the things that was a little disappointing to see, right? But it's something you had been mentioning to me throughout the offseason about how we weren't sure if Aiden Hutchinson was going to come back with the same juice he had last year, right? He had a pretty devastating leg injury. And in his game with the Packers, right, he did get a hurry. He did get a QB hit, 72 pass rush or 72 defensive grade, 71.3 pass rushing grade. It's not a bad game, right? But Aiden Hutchinson was looking like defensive player of the year last year, right? Just basically at the top of the echelons for edge rusher last year. And it seems like maybe the recovery road for him is going to be a little bit longer. So I think that's one to watch in this game, right? Because the Bears offensive line, especially at the tackle position, is one I typically try to tee off against with my edge rushers. But if you have Aiden Hutchinson and you were really banking on him being the guy, might be a few more weeks before you feel fully comfortable. And on the flip side of that, right, if you have a Darnell Wright or Braxton Jones and you have to start one of them, maybe you're not in full panic mode against this Lions defensive front.
Yeah, I actually wrote down that I think Braxton Jones bounces back and has a good game this week because I'm not threatened by Marcus Davenport. I don't think Hutch really is going to line up on that side too often. And when he does, if it is maybe 15% of snaps, he, like I said, he hasn't been that superstar we saw pre-injury. It's probably not all the way back yet. It's going to take time to work back into form. So if I'm not threatened by the others on that Lions front, I think this could be a bounce back game for Braxton Jones. Since entering the league, his pass blocking efficiency has increased every season up to 93.8 in 2024. That was not the case in week one, had a bit of a down week, but I do expect the overall trend of improvement to continue this season. And this may be a good, this matchup may be a good sort of springboard for that for the rest of the season. So I actually wrote down that I'm okay starting Braxton Jones, to your point. Otherwise, when it comes to skill players, I expect Jahmyr Gibbs to feast. I don't like the boom or bust type of player that Jameson Williams is, and I typically just stay away. But this is the kind of matchup where this should be a hit on the bell curve for him. So if you are going to trust Jameson Williams in any given week, this might be the week for it.
Yeah, good call out there. Next game, I'm curious what your thoughts are. I'm excited to talk about this one. It's Jacksonville versus the Bengals at the Bengals, okay? Jacksonville won pretty handedly against the Panthers last week. I was still really disappointed in their performance. Am I crazy for that?
Maybe a little bit because it is a new coach. It's going to look sloppy. It's week one of a new regime. So you're probably being a bit hard on a team that won with that kind of margin. You're probably being a little bit too harsh.
All right. I feel that way inside too. And I think it really is that I was expecting Trevor Lawrence to come out of the gate slinging the football, and I didn't see that, right? They ran the ball super effective, which in reality, when you're doing that and you win that way, you don't have to win the other way, right? Which is maybe what happened in this game. But just Trevor Lawrence, that's really what I've been looking at and saying, is he going to take the next step in his career with this new coach and with Travis Hunter at wide receiver, with Brian Thomas? Like, that's great setup. I'm still waiting for that. The Bengals are an interesting kind of opponent here, right? Because we were worried about their defense, but the pass rush looked really good last week with Trey Hendrickson and Shamar Stewart. I think that probably continues, even though if you're Jacksonville, you have to be excited about what you got out of Anton Harrison, Robert Hainsley, like really good performances on your offensive line from guys that you needed to take that step. So you're excited about it, but now you have a tougher matchup than what you had in Carolina, right? Now you have at the Bengals again, two really good edge rushers that are coming off of a monster game. I'm thinking those guys might eat in this one.
So I wrote down that I like the interior of the offensive line for Jacksonville with Hainsey, Macari, and Ezra Cleveland. And I think they fare better than the offensive tackles, Anton Harrison and Walker Little, because of those individual matchups, like you say. But then everywhere else, I do think this could be a Liam Cohen sort of clinic here. I expect a bounce back for Brian Thomas Jr., some improvement from Travis Hunter. And I typically like Jordan Battle, the safety for the Bengals. But in this particular matchup against this style of offense and Brenton Strange at tight end, who people are not talking about enough at all, I don't really like him this week. So I do think on the edge of the offensive line, probably advantage Bengals here. But I do think now that they're facing not the Browns, that elsewhere they could be in for a bit of a long day. So, I'll buy the interior of the offensive line for Jacksonville, and I'll buy their skill players in this matchup.
I really like that one. The next game is going to be a fun one, right? It's Giants and Cowboys, okay? Giants at the Cowboys. In my mind, I think of Parsons calling Abdul Carter saying, like, avenge me, right? Like, avenge me in this one. Go out there and tee off on my old team. Will it happen? I don't know. This one, I feel pretty strong that Dallas has a pretty big competitive advantage, especially with what we saw at Dak last week, right? Like, I feel like every year, Ray, you and I go on this podcast and talk about how Dak is severely underrated. And what does he do in week one? He goes out and balls against a really tough, Philadelphia team in defense. So I'm still thinking, especially with how kind of poor the Giants defensive back group looked, this is another game where he goes out and does the same thing. So I think Dak is going to be my player that I say must start. And then if you have anybody on the defensive back group in New York, for example, I think a player that I was really excited about, still am, but Tyler Nubin and Javon Holland, that little combo there, super pumped about them. They both had really hard games against Washington and Jaden Daniels. Don't think he gets any better against Dak. So those guys, if you have them and, borderline starting guys, I would say maybe this is a week to pass.
Yeah, the worst part of Dak's performance in week one is that it's going to be forgotten because it wasn't really reflected in the traditional stat sheet because there was about 90 yards worth of drops by his number one receiver alone, let alone the touchdown to a tight end and so forth. So we'll get into that. But yes, Dak against NFC East opponents is, in particular against NFC East opponents, is probably the most underrated quarterback in the league. This is another one where the rest of his team still overmatches the roster for the Giants. Stock up on the offensive skill players for the Cowboys. I still think the offensive line might be. I mean, you look across, you got Abdul Carter, you got Dexter Lawrence, you got Brian Burns. Probably a tough day for a young offensive line, but you're talking about an interior offensive line that is really good with Tyler Smith, Cooper Beebe, and Tyler Booker. So they will hold their own enough so that the Cowboys offense is going to move the ball. They're going to have good days. But for the Giants, Cowboys are going to be without Deron Bland. There's no timetable for his return from a foot injury. So the Cowboys let go of arguably the best defensive player in the league so that they could sign an often-injured cornerback and Jake Ferguson. But in any event, no Deron Bland, who also plays the slot. So this injury is sort of twofold here in that obviously it's great for Malik Neighbors going up against Khair Elam or a still sort of coming back to form Trayvon Diggs. But also Wan'Dale Robinson could have an even better game than he did last week because Bland manned that nickel spot. And now that he's gone and they're signing people off the street to play that nickel back position for the Cowboys, those are two skilled players for the Giants that I think could have a big game, maybe be a bit pesky on offense where the game isn't put away quite as early as you might think. Outside of that, yeah, I'm starting Oso Digizua on the Cowboys defensive line. Sam Williams led the team in pressures last week. If I really need an edge rusher, you probably don't this early in the season, but if you do for some reason at edge in week 2, Sam Williams might be a play, and then probably drop him because he's not going to grade well the rest of the year because he makes a lot of not great plays overall when it comes to the little things. So yeah, I think those are a few names to remember for this matchup. Like you said, advantage Cowboys, but Giants may be a bit peskier than you think because of some of the injuries and how they match up on the outside against the Cowboys.
All right. We have another division game with the Browns and Ravens at the 1:00 slot. This one, people are probably saying it's going to be a Ravens blowout, but I think if you looked at last week's game with the Bengals and Browns, you probably said the same thing before that game, that the Bengals were going to go in and blow out the Browns. And it's a 1-point game that the Browns probably should have won. I'm not saying it's going to be that close because I think the Ravens are a different animal than the Bengals look to be. But I still, I'm very optimistic. And we talked about this, like, yes, the Browns didn't do enough on offense. There's going to be a lot of holes on that offense throughout the season that pop up. But that defense is like a really good defense, and it might be like a league best defense at some point this year. And that's what happens when you go Mason Graham to go and pair with Myles Garrett, right? And maybe Mason Graham didn't have the best game of his early career right off the bat, but it just goes to show, right? Like, this is still a really, really good defensive unit. So I don't know how great I feel about any individual Baltimore player on offense besides Lamar Jackson, who is an obvious must start every single week. But I think on the defensive side, I get really excited about matchups this week against the Browns, kind of still abysmal offense, right? The offensive line is still weak at tackle. The receiver position is very shallow. Joe Flacco is still your starting quarterback, and your running back is Dylan Sampson. Like, it is a rough unit, probably, in my opinion, the worst in the league. So you go, obviously, you're starting Kyle Hamilton, and you look at the two defensive interiors in Nnamdi Madubuike and Travis Jones. And while those guys are typically, borderline starters week to week, I think this is a week where you feel very confident starting them against what is still a good defensive or offensive interior group for the Browns. But I do think they get the better of them. Odafe Oweh is a guy that, again, I would definitely start on the edge. He's a guy that will definitely get after it. And a guy like Joe Flacco in a week like this.
Yeah, my notes for this one were pretty brief. This is easy. Start the corners for the Cleveland Browns and obviously Myles Garrett, and then bench everybody else. For Baltimore, I do expect a bounce back game for Wiggins too, because I think the style of receiver matches up with his game better when they're facing off against the Browns. Probably not going to see too much of Cedric Tillman given the size differential there. So I think this is more of a tailor-made game for Wiggins at corner. And then I also wrote down, like you said, I expect Odafe Oweh to take full advantage of either DeJuan Jones or Jack Conklin, wherever he's lined up. They're going to provide some pass rush there for the Ravens. And I think you nailed it otherwise.
All right. Let's maybe, because we're going to have to pick up the pace here if we're going to get this done in time. We'll switch off game to game. So I'm going to take the next one, which is the Rams versus the Titans. And this one, to me, the reason I'm taking it is because it seems very easy, right? Like, this is a game where the Titans offensive line in week 1 did not look great. The pass rush unit for the Rams is looking to be something that's going to be a menace for teams basically the entire season. So I am looking at the defensive front for the Rams, and I'm going Jared Verse, Byron Young. I can start any of those guys and feel good about it. But it's really even a guy like Nate Landman, who just stepped out this week in week 1, 90.7 grade. Can you pick up a guy like him? I did in a couple leagues myself, because those are guys that the coach that they have there can find talent like that. And all year, you're going to see guys like that step up and play really well. So I would go and target some of those guys. Cam Kitchens, not that you and I ever miss on scouting, but Cam Kitchens actually played pretty well too. And he's a guy that, again, in a game like this might be a really interesting start at a position that you typically wouldn't start a guy like that, but you can in a week like this.
Maybe Cam Kitchens really just didn't care about Florida State, Miami. Who knows? Maybe he just really didn't care.
You go ahead and take the 49ers versus the Saints.
All right, 49ers versus the Saints. So this is really interesting because you're talking about a team that everybody predicted to be perhaps the worst in the league, facing off against a team that was not good last year, now has lost their starting quarterback in Brock Purdy, and maybe in a bit of a mini chaotic situation there. So it depends which Mac Jones shows up. The one that kind of performed pretty well for Liam Cohen, or excuse me, not Liam Cohen, but performed pretty well last year and now has the benefit of an offensive mind like Kyle Shanahan, who is going to get him some easy throws on the move and can maybe get him going, or the Mac Jones that, we all saw in New England. And this is why he's now on his third team during his relatively still young career. So this could go any number of which way. So I'm just looking at some matchups that I really like. Kelvin Banks Jr. for the Saints only gave up 2 pressures in his first start last week, but also didn't have a great game run blocking wise on the ground, which he typically should profile better as. If he has another good day against Bryce Huff and Bosa for the 49ers, that's going to really pique my interest as to what is he going to kind of become here, even early on as a rookie. And if you're mad at Dominic Pooney flipping to the other offensive line here for the Niners last week, I think he's going to bounce back here in a big way against that defensive line for the Saints in week 2. And I have a crazy off the wall. It's not a prediction, but wouldn't this be something if that happened? What if Marquez Valdes-Scantling has a big game? Like, what if the Mac Jones that just kind of, chucked it downfield and made Brian Thomas Jr. great in the second half of the season last year? What if he just also lets it rip, but that downfield receiver now is Marquez Valdes-Scantling and he actually catches the ball? Like, what if he's the beneficiary of that? I'm not saying you start MVS, but I'm just curious as to how he performs. And if push comes to shove, no, I'm going to take Kool-Aid McKinstry in a matchup between those DBs versus those receivers. So if I had to take 2, 1 from each, give me Kool-Aid McKinstry and give me obviously Ricky Pearsall for the 49ers. The style of offense, despite Purdy not being there, still really fits him incredibly well. So I think the Niners pull this out if we're going to do like the whole prediction thing. But all 22 wise, I think these are some really interesting matchups for 2 teams that could really go in any direction so far.
I love that. And fat chance MVS is going to catch the ball though, but I like the prediction.
Don't start.
I'm going to take the Seattle Seahawks playing the Pittsburgh Steelers. And this one, to me, I think there's a bunch of ways you can go. And there's really interesting matchups on both sides. But what I really look at is what the basically rookie tackle duo in New York did against TJ Watt and the Steelers defensive front, which in my mind was going to be one of the best, if not the best, defensive front groups in the NFL, right? Cam Hayward with just a 68.4 grade, TJ Watt 82.4, which is still great, right? But we look at Alex Highsmith with a 60 grade last week, Keanu Benton with a 48.7. So I start to ask myself, can the offensive line of the Seahawks, which has struggled in past years, right? But they put a lot of assets into, have some bodies that actually could compete and start in this matchup. Like Charles Cross, to me, if you have him, you're probably starting him every week. And I would continue to do that here. But Gray Zabel had a 61 grade, which is respectable against a pretty tough 49ers front as well. Can you start him and feel confident? It's definitely going to be tough, but I would say don't shy away from it. If you're a risk taker, this is one to take a risk on. And also Sam Darnold was very impressive to me in his first game with Seattle. I expected a lot worse. 82.6 offensive grade. Can you put him in a position here going against what is really a struggling Joey Porter Jr. And, obviously Jalen Ramsey had a great game, but there are ways to pick your poison against this defense and find some holes. I think that's what happened in their game against the Jets. So I think, Seattle can do something similar next week here. Let's jump. You can start talking about Buffalo and the Jets, which is a fun one.
Yeah, the Battle of New York versus New Jersey. So you kind of touched on it. I want to see Armand Membu again. Does he give up zero pressures yet again for the second week in a row and still be a dominant run blocker? If he does that against Greg Rousseau and the other Bosa, then yeah, I mean, wow, that's fantastic for the Jets that haven't had that type of play at offensive tackle for a very long time, like since DeBrickashaw maybe. Has it been that long? That's insane to me. I expect a bounce back for the secondary of the Bills, particularly Christian Benford. And at the same token, a step back for someone like Keon Coleman outside on offense, because someone like Sauce Gardner is built for that type of matchup against Coleman, who's not going to also be able to really threaten him deep too much. So stylistically, I think it's an interesting inverse from what the Bills had to deal with against Baltimore last week, given, again, styles make fights. So again, just a nice switch up that they're going to have to really adjust to heading into week 2. I still think overall the Bills have just too much firepower. Josh Allen, when he's on. But I do think as a whole, the defense for really both of these teams is probably going to hold up pretty well in the trenches and in the front sevens. But I think when, push comes to shove there, I think eventually the Bills' just overall roster strength sort of overtakes that in this game and wins out in the end. But there could be some, again, real bright spots at premium spots. Again, looking at the Jets' offensive tackles and looking at, again, on the outside on defense as well for the Jets. They can keep them in it for a pretty darn long time because that defense is going to be a stickler.
All right. I have a fun one here. Battle of the Bad at 4 p.m. with Carolina versus the Cardinals at Arizona. We talked a little bit about Tet versus Will Johnson in the preview a little bit here, and I think that's a good matchup to keep an eye on. But it's really the rest of the defensive back group for Arizona that I think is a must start in this one. Taylor Demerson in week 1, 80.4 grade, right? Bubba Baker, Buda Baker. I think I've done that every single time. Another great week from him and just an absolute pro. Max Melton had a really respectable game as well, right? And they played what I think is a tougher opponent, even though another easy one in New Orleans, but a better passing game. Sorry for the noise.
It is every episode.
Sorry for the noise. But when you look at Carolina and the weapons that they have and what they achieved in week 1, right? Besides Tet McMillan, who we spent enough time talking about, there was really nothing from Hunter Renfrow, who got a lot of hype in this preseason. David Moore, Xavier Legette with a 53.9 grade. There was a lot of talk about him in the preseason about how the addition of Tet McMillan, who is more of that strategic route runner, can open up some things for Xavier Legette and let him play to his strengths. And it didn't happen in week 1. He just consistently failed to get open. Jatavion Sanders as well, 51.2 grade. There's not a lot of weapons that scare defenses. And it's hard when a team like Carolina has spent back-to-back years of first-round picks on wide receiver to still be in the position they are in. But I think they really are, right? And as great as Hubbard has been at running back, he's not scaring anybody, right? And I think that's kind of what's going to be the downfall of Carolina this year is even with the offensive line being rebuilt and a bit better, there's a lot of pressure on Bryce Young when all you have is really one receiver that can get open. I will hand it to you. Let's talk about Broncos and Colts.
Ooh, Broncos and Colts. Okay, so this ideally should be a better matchup for Josh Downs. So if you're down on him after week 1, just be patient. I think this could be a sneaky play for your wide receiver 3 if you're choosing that set in all 22. I would avoid Pierce and Pittman Jr. for the Colts, given the outside corners for Denver, especially Surtain. I'm just not. I don't think that style is going to work this week. I think the Colts are going to work the inside for their passing game with Downs and what we've seen from Tyler Warren. I think that's going to be their bread and butter through the air. But then on the ground, we all know what they like to do with Jonathan Taylor and that offensive line. So you look at players for Denver like John Franklin Myers or Jonathan Allen. I'm not a big fan of that matchup this week. for them. If I'll probably look elsewhere on my depth chart if I need players at that spot. Nick Benito has also played really well and progressed really well. I know you're a big fan of his, but I'm not sure this is his style of game, given the style of the Colts. So this might be one of his lower graded games to start the year. Yes, he was the second highest graded pass rusher in week 1, but 28th overall versus the run, which is still not bad, but this Colts team and offense is still going to lean on the run game and play downhill. It's not necessarily going to always be a Daniel Jones sort of air show. Let's not get ahead of ourselves after just week 1 here. So stylistically, I don't love the matchup for the front of the Broncos, but I do like it sort of in their secondary. And I think overall, I do see them coming out on top, even though when I look at the individual matchups, I see a lot to like with the Broncos, I still see a lot to like with the Colts, but I think overall, Denver, I think I can expect more steady play from Bo Nix in that offense from Sean Payton, and I'm not sure they do enough on defense to slow down the Broncos there. And I see them ultimately winning. But again, for all 22 purposes, I think some of those individual matchups highlighted there probably favor the Colts more than they do the Denver Broncos.
All right. I have a really fun one, which is really the Super Bowl matchup from last year. So Eagles Chiefs at the Chiefs. This is another one that I look at the tackle duo in Kansas City and I say, this might be the one where the Eagles feast again. And if you look at how they won that Super Bowl, right, we look at how Josh Sweat and Milton Williams just absolutely feasted, 5 sacks combined with those two guys. Neither of them is with the team anymore, right? But Nolan Smith has stepped up. Hopefully Jalen Carter plays this week and doesn't do something as idiotic as he did last week. That should be an absolute feast on what, in my opinion, I watched the Chiefs game last week against the Chargers, and is Jawan Taylor the worst offensive tackle in the NFL starting today? And I'm being serious. Is he?
There's definitely someone worse. Who? I don't know. Give me 30 seconds, but no, he can't be the worst. I mean, he might be the worst.
Okay.
But probably not
four false start penalties. And I think there were some that just weren't called. The refs got tired of doing it to him. 4 false start penalties, 49.5 grade. I can probably go into some blocking stats here in a second for him. But
you're going to get the O-line Twitter after you. Those weren't actually false starts. Just get ready for that.
Oh, they were. Trust me, they were. Two pressures allowed, 1 hurry allowed, 1 quarterback hit allowed. But again, when you're leaving early every time, it's hard to really let up pressures. I really think he might be the worst offensive tackle in the NFL right now. And I think if the Chiefs had something else resembling a worthy person to put in that spot, I think he would have been replaced during that game. I would have pulled him. Just being realistic, I would have pulled him after his second false start. I would be like, you're done, get out. I expect Josh Simmons to have a better game. Honestly, I thought he looked pretty good just in terms of his ability to handle kind of the big lights and the pressure. I think half of his snaps were against Khalil Mack, which is a Hall of Fame caliber player. That's what his first NFL game was, right? So while he wasn't fantastic, it wasn't as bad as what I saw from Jawan Taylor for sure. But that is really going to be what I think defines this game, is if Philly can go after the passer again, like they did last year in the Super Bowl, it's going to be a nightmare, right? And I see Nolan Smith and what he was able to do last week against Dallas. Can he do that again? Can he continue to get after the passer? He had 4 hurries last week. Jordan Davis had 3 himself, and he had a pretty good game in the Super Bowl last year as well. Those 2 guys are interesting guys to watch. And then again, if Jalen Carter's back and healthy in this one, I expect he gets after the passer as well, pretty handedly. All right, Ray.
Dan Moore was good. Dan Moore was good last year. He's not the worst. I don't know. I'm just going to throw his name out there.
Dude, I don't think anyone is worse than a guy that doesn't know how to freaking listen to a snap count. You're going to talk to us about the Falcons and the Vikings.
Okay. I'm buying the entire Vikings offensive line. If you have a Minnesota Vikings offensive lineman in your all-22 depth chart, start them. Darisaw, Jackson, Kelly, Fries, O'Neal, all of them. Just start them if you got them. So to that end, if you want to expand on that a little bit, if you platoon your running backs, sure. Aaron Jones or Jordan Mason, absolutely go for it. I don't think I start a single Atlanta Falcons defensive player here. AJ Terrell versus Justin Jefferson, I don't know, Jim. Maybe Jesse Bates, because I like veteran safeties typically against young quarterbacks like this. But everything else is so slanted in the Vikings' favor, and Kevin O'Connell knows which buttons to push that I don't necessarily think anything is going to sort of script-wise fall into the favor of the Falcons defense here, unless, again, maybe McCarthy puts the ball in harm's way as a young quarterback does. And, he had a good fourth quarter, so everybody forgets him putting the ball in harm's way and missing throws earlier on in that Monday night game. But that's still a possibility. But otherwise, matchup to matchup, it almost all favors the Vikings when they're on offense. On the flip side, I do think the Vikings are vulnerable in the middle of their defense. And I think the skill player matchups for the Falcons, London and Kyle Pitts in particular against Byron Murphy, Isaiah Rodgers, and Jeff Okudah, those guys can't match up physically with Drake London. And again, Kyle Pitts, here I go buying into it. So I just think physically the Falcons can overwhelm them on the outside in the skill positions. So I'm fading the Minnesota secondary, their corners and safeties, including Josh Metellus, not this week. So yeah, I expect points to be scored here. Maybe young quarterback Penix, maybe he can struggle a bit too. Kind of the same thing that applies for McCarthy here. But again, individual matchup wise, I think each offense is really favored against their defensive counterparts. So I think Minnesota overall has the advantage and probably pulls it out. But if you have offensive players in this game, probably starting them.
Yeah, it's fun. It's like McCarthy gets to play in 2 games against QBs that were picked above him, right? So yeah, pretty fun to watch.
Without great defenses on the other side.
Without great defenses. Although I'll give it to him, right? The pass rushers in Atlanta looked a lot better than what they've had the past few years.
You would give that to them.
You have to. You have to.
1 week.
You have to. I have Tampa Bay versus Houston, and I think this one's pretty easy. I'm not going to talk about it for a long time. I think Houston, it's obvious that they have massive holes at receiver, right? Xavier Hutchinson got 43 snaps. Jaden Higgins got 27. Jalen Noel got 17. None of them produced anything that was really troubling or upsetting for the opponent. Nico Collins, even himself, 58.7 grade last week against what is a really bad secondary for the Rams, right? Like that's a poor secondary to go against and have such bad results. So Tampa Bay's defense is much stronger in the defensive back group. The boy that you keep downplaying, right? Every single time we speak, you bash Zion McCollum, telling me that he's just a 1 week wonder. And in week 1 of the NFL, 77 grade, looking really good again. Highest graded defensive player for Tampa Bay. I expect him to have a really good game again against that weak passing game. Jacob Parrish and Antoine Winfield Jr. I think all of these guys are must starts this week if you have them. Do you want to defend yourself against McMullen, or you're just going to take the hit?
I don't know. I'm not going to. It's not taking a hit. It's 1 week. It's not in my favorites. It's been 1 week. All right.
It's been 1 week.
Relax.
All right. Do you have something for Monday night, or are we just sticking to Sunday?
I think we're sticking to Sunday because we might be in front of the mic on Monday. I don't know. I don't know what your schedule looks like.
I would love to be.
Yeah.
All right. So let's plan on that. So that kind of wraps up the game review. Ray, you had sent me something pretty interesting on a quarterback chart that you saw on Twitter. You want to take a couple minutes to talk about it?
Oh, gosh. Dude, I don't remember what I had for breakfast today, but sure. I did have a note following week 1, or rather the Thursday night game in week 1 in particular, but there is a chart out there from Judah Fortgang of PFF, who actually did partake in one of our beta all 22 leagues back in the day from PFF that basically shows the time to throw and the average depth of target. It's one of those where, if everything is at the top right, it's really good, right? But in general, what this chart in particular shows, Eagles fans got mad on Twitter. I think they're taking it too seriously because A, what should they care based on their accomplishments? But B, in general, I think my takeaway from this was, don't overreact to week 1 or early season woes, so to speak, especially if this player or team or unit has a track record of starting slow. The Bengals always start slow. They just randomly flip the switch in the fourth week of September for some reason. So I actually was not surprised that that game went down. I was surprised that they had like -2 yards in the second half, but I was surprised that the Browns could have pulled it out and then, of course, ultimately didn't. So in general, I mean, the Packers typically have started slow in recent years too. They obviously got a big win against a Detroit team still adjusting to a new staff. But in general, Jalen Hurts, I wanted to talk about because everyone's going to be like, see, this is Jalen Hurts. And I'm like half defending him. And I'm the guy that, kind of always has to sort of reel people in and kind of, say, take it easy with Jalen Hurts. But in any event, Jalen Hurts' time to throw was about 3.6 seconds in week 1. And yet his average depth of target was really bad, like 2 point something, if that. It was by far the lowest in the league, despite having the most time to throw by at least 0.3 seconds in the pocket. And I think a part of that is, we saw last year Jalen Hurts starts very slow. So in all 22, if you have 2 quality quarterbacks, and Jalen Hurts is one of them, but maybe he has a bit of a tough matchup in the first few weeks of the season, or you're worried that A.J. Brown is not yet right with his hamstring and isn't the type of player that he typically is just yet and is still working his way back, then don't put it on the shoulders of Jalen Hurts, because the Eagles defense is going to do enough to win the game, but they're not going to necessarily put it on Hurts' shoulders to do so. So he might not grade out that well. But then in general, if this player starts out kind of slow, then don't overreact when you see these I won't even say bad, because it wasn't bad, but it was a mediocre performance overall, considering the amount of time he had to throw. He had over 3.6 seconds to throw in week 1 against the Cowboys. In 2024, he led the league in time to throw again, but yet didn't have a single game with as high of an average time to throw as he did against the Cowboys in week 1. That doesn't mean that I'm out on Jalen Hurts or that you should be out on Jalen Hurts, but now we're identifying a trend where he's starting off slowly. His wide receiver 1 might not be back to full health. That offensive line, Dickerson's a little bit banged up. Tyler Steen is a new face in there. They're still also kind of finding themselves a bit. So again, just kind of have some perspective overall with some of these name players and with guys that, again, we've seen this from before. So don't freak out, but maybe temper expectations for someone like Jalen Hurts until, I don't know, the calendar hits October and the leaves are falling off the trees instead of just changing color.
That's a good call out. And I did want to correct you, because this is not one of those charts that you want to be top right. If you're top right, it means, yes, you're throwing for, you're throwing down the field, but you're also taking an eternity to throw the ball. The majority of the good players in the NFL should be in the middle of this chart, meaning they're not getting the ball out in 2 seconds because they have an offensive line that can block for them, right? And they're also like being reasonable about what they're doing with the football. I don't know if you remember, but Anthony Richardson, I think, averaged like 10 yards a throw last year, right? Like, so he's throwing the ball down the field at a ridiculous margin. That doesn't always like mean you're a good quarterback. Like, that's not something you want, right? You want to have some kind of temperament with the football in your hand. So the majority of like the good players, I'd say, are in the middle of this, right? It's actually interesting because Jordan Love and Dak Prescott are kind of on an island towards the middle top, which means they're throwing the ball under 3 seconds and down the field, and they both did it at a really great rate in week 1. But to your point, I think what this tells me is it's meaningless in 1 week's, because it's also like, if my opponent gives me deep throws, I'm going to take deep throws. But next week, my opponent might be somebody very different that's going to take that away, and I'm going to get the ball out really quick and do it shallow. So I don't know if this chart necessarily tells me anything now, but yes, I agree with you. Over the course of a season, it's much more interesting. And I would also say, I do think that there are things you can find in week 1. There's bits of information that you can find in week 1. When you see a guy like Will Johnson do what he did, I think that's impressive. When you see Zion McCullin come out and have another good week, it's like, okay, this isn't just a blip. He's a good player. When you see Marvin Harrison Jr. step out and look really, really good, right? It was against the Saints and they're a weak opponent, but he looked really good, right? And it makes you feel a lot better saying, okay, maybe he did put on some muscle and this is going to be a better year for Marvin Harrison Jr. When you saw Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel on Houston really not look super great, to me, that's a little concerning, right? Because you're saying to yourself, These are two players that were targeted by this team. They were going to give him a role. They gave him a role, and they didn't really look like they were difference makers that are going to be able to open up this offense, right? I do think there's a lot you can learn in week one, which will set you up for the season. I mean, even a guy like Isaac Tesla, right, who we kind of all saw in the preseason going, okay, is this just preseason or is this going to translate? He had one catch, right? It was an awesome catch, but we knew that he can do that, right? So maybe, again, in week one, we found out Isaac Tesla, he's not going to get 10 catches a game like he did in preseason, but when he makes a big play, it could be a game-changing play. I also wanted to just really quickly shout out, we had talked about how Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel were like fine, but we didn't really love either of them very much in the scouting process. But the quarterback, when we watched the film for that team, looked really good. And I haven't heard one person talk about him. Well, he just beat Iowa 16-13 last week. He's 3-0. He's got 6 touchdown passes and no interceptions without those two guys. Maybe just a guy to keep an eye on, right? Maybe just a guy to keep an eye on. He's a junior. He'll probably come back for senior year because nobody's talking about him, and this is a good quarterback class. But hey, if there was ever a Brock Purdy number 2, I think maybe we found him.
Big Rocco Becht guy, huh? Big Rocco Becht guy.
Why not, man? Call my shot.
Very well coached team over there at Iowa State. I'm a fan of what they're doing over there.
All right, Ray. Anything else you want to talk about today?
On camera? Nah, I'm good.
Oh, geez. I'm terrified to hang up the call. That's what I get for talking politics to start this off. But no, thank you, everybody.
None of that.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. If you haven't yet, give us a follow on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and X at all22_PFF, and give us a review wherever you watch or listen to your podcasts, and have a great rest of your day.
Go.